Okay.
Good afternoon, and welcome to meeting number 8 of our AI task force. To quote one of our favorite people on the panelist section, it's a warm and blue sky day, so I hope you're enjoying it. We'll go through a couple of housekeeping measures as we usually do. Task force members and technical advisors should be showing up as panelists in the Zoom. If you're not, please contact either Scott or Scott or Dan, rather. I apologize. And they can promote you. It'll be the easiest and quickest promotion you've ever received. This meeting is being recorded, as I think you just heard. You can access prior recordings on the GoPIF website and just direct yourself to the AI task force. It's pretty easy and pretty obvious. Today, amazingly enough, we're going to close out our series of task force meetings with a discussion of some of the harms that AI can cause and how states can begin to act to protect their citizens through legislation and public awareness. First up, we'll look at state legislative activity. Ken Harding, a native Mainer actually, has returned to Maine for us, but he's coming to us from the National Governors Association and will give us the lay of the land on how states are approaching regulation of AI. Brian Hubble from GoPIF will follow up with Ken to sort of drill down and look at Maine and give us a brief summary of the AI-related legislation considered by the 132nd legislature this past spring. We'll then turn our attentions to the impact AI may have on energy resources. Again, going from a national perspective to a state perspective, we will start with Sarah Smith from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, who's going to lay out their analysis and show the growing demand for data centers. And then we'll return to Maine and our own Dan Burgess from the Governor's Energy Office to talk about how AI energy impacts may show up here in Maine. We'll wrap up our presentations with an AI panel to talk about awareness and literacy. From very early in our discussions, the task force has frequently come back to this idea of supporting Mainers' AI fluency as being central to their ability to embrace AI's opportunities and to navigate the challenges. You'll hear about the emerging strategies from other places, the role of trusted institutions like libraries, universities, and community colleges, and the lessons we've learned from public health messaging that could work together to shape our recommendations. We'll then take a short break, and we'll return with plenty of time for discussion. Finally, the co-chairs have asked Scott to spend a couple of minutes at the end of the call updating us on the rest of the work for this summer and early fall as we look forward to closing out and building our report and making our recommendations by our October deadline. We promise, though, we'll have you out by 4 o'clock. So let's turn to the federal government and approaching AI legislation. And let's dive in. I'm delighted to welcome Ken Hardy from the National Governors Association. Ken is a program director for NGA's Public Safety and Legal Counsel team, where he's been helping governors' offices keep track of AI legislation. And importantly, as I mentioned earlier, Ken's a Maine native. He's going to share a bit of an overview of what's happening around the country on legislation regulating AI. And we'll have about 15 minutes for Ken and Brian, and then we'll turn to Brian Hubble, who will take some time to talk about state activities, and then we'll have time for questions and hopefully get your answers. So, Ken, why don't we take it away with you? And we're going to hear from you on the national perspective, and then go to Brian on the statewide perspective.
Okay, thank you. Just share my screen. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes, I can. Well, it's coming. There it is.
Okay, great. So, hello, my name is Ken Hardy, and I am a program director at the National Governors Association. It's great to be with you today, especially as a former Mainer, as you said. I see a lot of familiar and friendly faces on the task force. I was excited to be asked to join you on this topic, particularly because it's been something on the top of mind at many of the convenings I've been to this summer. I want to cover a few different topics in the next few minutes, and then I'll leave some time for questions before handing it back over to Brian. First, I'll very briefly share a little bit about the National Governors Association and how we work with states and territories and their administration staff. Second, I will highlight some of the executive actions we're seeing in the AI policy space. Third, I'll dive into some legislative AI trends. And finally, I'll do a bit of a deeper dive into a few specific areas I've been told by your staff are of interest to the task force. So the National Governors Association was founded in 1908 and is the bipartisan membership organization for the 55 governors of our nation's state and territories. NGA has four main parts, as you can see here, to our organization, aimed at serving governors' offices, building partnerships, advocating for governors' shared policy interests in front of the federal government, and providing policy support. The NGA Center for Best Practices, where I work, has 14 different policy teams that reflect key policy issues we see across all the states, and we share research, policy knowledge, and best practices across the country with them. I specifically direct our public safety and legal counsels team, which includes a network of all 55 of the governor's legal counsels. And AI is something that we've been talking about very in depth. And one of the interesting main takeaways from working on AI policy in the past few years is just navigating the impacts and the potential policy implications it has on every single policy area we cover at NGA. So it's very encouraging when we see coordinating bodies like this attempt to get ahead of things, scope out possible issues and opportunities, and organize efforts. In terms you'll understand, dare a go. Next, I want to share some broad principles that we hear in discussions with practitioners and policymakers across states and from the experts who are developing new AI technology. And this is such a fast-moving area. There's so much we don't know about what we don't know. And the information contained within this presentation really is changing from day to day and week to week. But first is the importance of staying vigilant about potential AI harms, but not just focusing on the harm, also focusing on the benefits. AI has a lot to offer, and we are learning more about it every day. So finding the balance between innovation promotion and regulatory caution is the sweet spot that everybody across the country seems to be looking for. It requires regulating with agility and deploying flexible rules. When you're regulating an emergent technology, you have to try to stay active and adaptive and not just build rules and frameworks, but actually build the capacity, the underlying capacity to keep pace with changes in the industry. Next, unique to governments and state government is the need to think about managing risks not only as a regulator, but also as a user. There's a lot of talk about improving government operations and promoting the responsible use of AI systems. So states are all looking to each other to see how each are developing and deploying and implementing. A focus in many states is encouraging partnerships and economic development opportunities, figuring out how to support AI industry collaboration in key sectors with states and their healthcare workforces, their agricultural workforces, labor. It's all going to impact everything. So it's going to require breaking down silos, which is sometimes hard in the state government sphere. A large regulatory piece here will be federal-state coordination and potential preemption issues. We just saw that there was possibly a moratorium in the Build Back Better bill that would have preempted state regulation for 10 years on AI. It was removed. But we know that states are often the regulator of first resort for these emergent technologies, but you really need to be thinking about and trying to anticipate what are the federal regulations going to be and how are they going to interact with state regulations. And finally, just anticipating future challenges. I was just at a conference with an AI and digital regulation expert, and he said back in the mid-90s, he probably could have anticipated that phones would someday be equipped with the internet and email in some form, but he never would have conceived of social media and how that would impact our society. So it's always thinking about the next thing, and we have to be adapting workforces, need to meet energy demands, which I heard you mention a moment ago, you're going to be covering a little later, grappling with the boundaries of technology and free speech, and just being comfortable with expecting the unexpected. And finally here, I just want to say also that we also hear that as AI systems are employed, the need to keep some sort of human element involved at the numerous levels of implementation is so important. Because while AI systems may act human and they may seem to make rational decisions, and that's just going to continue to get better and better, they won't know when they're making mistakes. And the human element to catch that and rectify it and remedy it is going to be so important. So, on the front of gubernatorial action, you guys are ahead of the game, and you joined 14 other states in having an executive order on AI and organizing this task force. But governors are using many other tools other than just executive orders. So we see many governors appointing AI leads or data leads tasked with overseeing the issues broadly in their state. A lot of other governors are instructing agencies to do use of inventories in agencies and develop specific in-house guidelines. And many are establishing AI centers of excellence, AI hubs, or other partnerships with universities and private entities focused on research and development, innovation, and state collaboration. I'll highlight Massachusetts here as a good example that's been working on this. Over the last 6 months, they've founded one of these and they've been building it up. So if you want to see kind of maybe what another state is doing, that would be a good place to look. Next, I want to talk about um, sorry, my slides here got out of order. Next, I want to talk about legislative trends. There's been a major uptake in AI-related legislation in recent years, particularly as Gen AI tools have been introduced and popularized. These bills generally address the design, development, and use of AI, focusing on data privacy, transparency, reliability, effectiveness, and fairness and equity. We've been attempting to analyze the different various pieces of legislation, and we've kind of developed 9 different buckets that we see things falling into. But I want to note that these buckets aren't mutually exclusive. They're not white and black and white and cut and dry. Many of these categories are going to overlap. Bills are going to include many multiple topics, and lines are just going to become more blurry as legislation is implemented. But I'll touch on some of these areas in the next couple minutes, and then I'll get into some highlights on more specific things, as I said, that your staff said you might specifically be interested in. I also want to stop here and stress something that I know that you've all been thinking about, but that is counterintuitive and I think is worth stating out loud, because you hear it kind of in the background, but you don't hear it really expressed. And that is that absent new legislation and policy, the existing frameworks for data privacy or technology, which already exist and which are already in statute, are going to apply to AI. So even if you don't regulate, there are going to be things that are going to apply that haven't been kind of thought of as applying. And while there's a tendency to think of making all new structures and building all new laws out of scratch for technology, in some cases, regulating might just be adjusting the older laws or statutes or policies instead of creating a new foundation. Really, the question I heard it framed as that I thought was really good was, are you using a 19th or 20th century operating platform for a 21st century program? And kind of distinguishing when you can amend it to work and when you need to do something new to work is really kind of the key to thinking of all this. So diving in more specifically, AI adoption has spurred many states to tackle broad data privacy legislation and protections in the last 2 or 3 years. These laws are really, on this level, are a great model to look at for cross-sector collaboration because they're encompassing so much of the sphere and kind of trying to think about things ahead of time, being iterative for the future. In the AI space, these bills are designed to protect individuals from abusive data practices, i.e. the inappropriate, irrelevant, or unauthorized use or reuse of consumer data, and kind of ensure that they have agency over how an AI system collects and uses data about them. Utah recently passed a very interesting bill on data profile portability, like allowing people to take their data from one kind of use, either social media or AI system to another. And it's a really novel way of thinking about it. Not every state, I think, will probably replicate it, but I suggest looking at it because it raises a lot of questions that I think will help states deal with this. Some states have enacted legislation to ensure that individuals know when and how an AI system is being used. That is mostly happening through disclosure, allowing the user to know that a system is AI. What this user does with that is up to them. And state approaches to ensuring data privacy centers around the ability of consumers to kind of opt out of profiling if it furthers a system's automated decision-making process or has similar legal effects that they don't want to. So allowing people to have the agency to say, no, I'm not going to use these. That's going to be particularly harder, we're seeing, as these things become more integrated into our everyday systems. I mentioned Utah. Colorado is another great example to look here on kind of data privacy. Their law is very expansive and tries to deal with these things in a very broad way. And we just, I think, looking at that would help you to think through these issues. So another trend we saw this year is the related to the use of deepfakes. And we saw many state legislatures refining laws to curb the misuse of deepfake technology, focusing on issues like fraud, defamation, election manipulation, and non-consensual explicit materials. As we know, Gen AI tools may be exploited to create false election-related content and AI-generated explicit content, which has been sparking a lot of alarm about election interference and sexual victimization. 28 states have enacted laws related to deepfakes used in political communications, such as campaign advertisements, and in more than half of those, the law is applied to political materials distributed within a certain number of days before an election, and most included some sort of exemption if you contain some sort of disclosure. So to go back to my point about kind of the laws that already apply or kind of using the existing frameworks to look ahead, here it's like campaign finance is a way to think of this. Like, do we need to kind of apply the campaign finance frameworks to how we're thinking, but not about money in this particular case, but about content? Can we amend them those ways? And there are some that did just establish laws that were outright bans on AI content leading up to an election. Many states have also passed legislation that would outlaw the creation and dissemination of pornography generated by AI and impose criminal penalties. This is an area we saw really broad political consensus on and movement across the board. 45 states now have some sort of law or regulation passed on this. And really the question we see people grappling with this is, do you make it just generally about all of this, or some states are sort of exempting adult stuff and really diving down where kids images are being exploited on this. Another area that we think will be we had the consensus on that we think will be the next consensus, that next session, a lot of agreement's going to come on, is chatbots. Particularly as it relates to youth mental health and online safety. We're seeing a lot of legislation designed to place guardrails around chatbot use. Um, the legislation's aimed at protecting kids from the dangers of AI-generated companion chatbots that simulate human-like interactions. New York, as an example here, they recently passed a law specifying that targeting AI companies. And the law requires chatbots to have protocols to detect and address suicidal ideation or self-harm by users. And it includes a provision that they have to then refer them to crisis services if they're detecting that. Operators also must notify users verbally or in writing that they're communicating with AI, not a human, and that notification has to be provided at least every 3 hours during interactions. So those reminders to people that it's coming up over and over to remind them that they're not interacting with a human. And just having seen the devastating stories in the news about kids and the use of these bots, we just know that this space is going to be one where, as the technology advances, really there's going to be a call for regulation on this by the citizens, so something to get ahead of. And then finally, to kind of flip that on its head, with the lack of trained mental health professionals across the country, which I know Maine is also is experiencing, many legislators and policymakers are thinking about turning to AI for mental health treatment. According to the American Medical Association, 250 AI-related health bills were introduced in 2025 across 34 states, including mental health treatment and related clinical purposes. But only a few really were able to dig down and enact legislation during this session. Utah being one of them. They have some chatbot legislation outside of their data privacy where they were able to kind of put some guardrails around mental health services, counseling, and other treatments. And then Nevada, passed a bill that restricted the use of AI in public schools to perform the functions and duties of school counselors, psychologists, or social workers. So I know that that was a lot of information because this topic is so broad and there are a million different ways we could go. But I want to close with the three of the thoughts I kind of started with at the beginning. Generally, regulating AI will be about being flexible and balancing the benefits and positive effects of new AI with the potential harms. Second, you want to keep the human element in when you can to make sure that there's someone checking that as AI advances, that you're able to catch those things where problems are going to arise. And third, just being uncomfortable with saying we aren't going to know everything. And so this is going to be a process that we're going to have to continue to work on. That is sometimes hard for policymakers to do, but I think as this technology advances, we're seeing throughout states that kind of bringing that kind of humility to it is important in the dialogues you have with the public about doing what you're going to do behind this. So I just want to say thank you again, and NGA is here to keep monitoring this issue and answer any questions you might have. If you have other specific questions about like specific AI and other any of the 14 policy areas that we cover, I can help make those connections for you, and we're always happy to do deep dives and get more information. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
President Dagler, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. And Ken, thank you for a very interesting overview. We're going to hold questions for now. We're going to take that synopsis and we're going to look at the trends and themes that might have built out in 132nd with our friend Brian Hubble from GoPIF. And then we'll come back. And Ken, I especially appreciate your theme on sort of continuous development because this is a changing environment. Brian, how are we doing here in Maine?
Uh, I, Excellent question, and thank you for inviting me. For those who don't know me, I'm Senior Policy Advisor in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. We track quite a few bills, as you can imagine, through the session. I'm going to, in the interest of time, just really burn through a list of the 8 or 9 bills that the legislature considered this session. I'm happy to provide more detailed information if it's helpful offline. Uh, uh, in any way that's useful to follow up. I also don't want to suggest that I'm representing legislators' internal perspectives on these bills. You have members of this task force who are better placed to do that than I am, but I'm going to just sort of go through the list if that's all right. I don't know if can I share my screen? Yes. Did that show up?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
All right. Thank you. I should always preface this by saying that my tech skills were founded in manual typewriters and rotary mimeograph machines. So you'll recognize in this list of bills all the themes I think that Ken was touching on, and Ken, thank you very much for that. Starting sort of from the top of the list, the bills that actually made it through, the first was a fairly simple bill about disclosure of the use of chatbots. Again, fairly straightforward. It just requires that in commercial transactions, consumers understand that they're interacting with a chatbot, and that's within the framework of the existing Maine Unfair Trade Practices Act, so it would be enforced through whatever the mechanisms the AG usually uses for that. And also, I believe there's a potential for private rights of action that could follow from unauthorized, undisclosed use of chatbots. The next bill, the one relating to revenge porn, again, I think you'll see in a number of these, the committees didn't end up spending that much time discussing sort of the technical aspects of artificial intelligence. they pretty rapidly were trying to figure out how to frame that into existing regulations. And this was a good example where they really didn't, they stayed away from the issue of creation of these images and just made sure that the dissemination of them fit into the state's current revenge porn laws. Um, uh, and then the other, I mean, I guess the other acknowledgement within the Judiciary Committee in relation to that was certain sort of urgency that the facility of creating these images provides that warranted giving more direct access to people who were actually threatened by for with the use of such images to be have sort of accelerated access to protection from abuse orders. Again, that one was enacted, signed into law. No controversy, I think, on this subject itself. The third bill was related to copyright infringement for artists. The Education Committee did not actually engage in a policy discussion. That their approach to this was to simply charge the Maine Arts Commission with doing some work and coming back with some recommendations uh, related to that. There were several other bills in the Education Committee relating to social media use, but they were really targeted on use of phones in schools. And they did, out of that set of bills, they did enact a bill that would require school boards to develop social media policies. But the Maine Arts Commission bill was enacted by the legislature. Maine Arts Commission supported it in the hearing. The bill then went to the appropriations table where it was enacted with a reduction in funding. So the bill actually is held right now on the governor's desk because I think the Maine Arts Commission was concerned that they didn't want to be in a position of having to quickly deliver a product, a substandard product as a result of lack of funding. So while that report might be helpful to this task commission's work, that's not likely to come through until the end of next session. But it's good to know that it's out there. Big one in HCIFS related to health insurance. Again, not an unusual discussion in the committee. It was, I mean, I think the heart of this one was simply to make sure that the use of AI in arbitrating health insurance claims was subject to transparency and review by actual humans. Again, a theme that this task force well understands. That bill was actually carried over. So they will continue to work on that. They are, of course, well aware of this task force work, and I think hoping that it will contribute to whatever carryover discussion they have in the second session. There were two bills in that committee. They disposed of the other one, kept 1301, but they liked a provision in the other bill, which would require the Bureau of Insurance to actually develop rules related to the use of AI. So that may be
Brian?
what they're thinking of. Yep.
Excuse me, just in the interest of time, because we've got a lot of work to do and you've got a lot of valuable information here. If you just sort of summarize the four bills that were killed in committee, that might help us, and then we'll get some questions and answers into you and Ken.
Again, the campaigning and advertising one, I have an asterisk next to because that was killed in the end simply because VLA committee had a substantial election finance bill, which rewrote huge parts of that statute. And they were really trying to like figure that out as in along the lines that Ken was describing. There was some concern in committee about how far reaching that would be. For example, whether or not superimposition of a clown nose on an opponent's image would be considered regulated manipulation. The social media, the schools bill I mentioned killed. The Judiciary Committee did a lot of work this session on data privacy. So they actually bailed out on the discussion of the use of AI for collusion and rent setting by landlords. They would have liked to have sent that to the Housing Committee in the end, but that bill got killed. And then the last one is really probably closer to the work of this committee, and you have members who are familiar with it. SLG killed a bill having to do with, that would have required OIT to do essentially what they're involved in already, maintain a list of approved AI software, provide transparency for that. And that's the summary, I think, of the bills that went forward. There was another one over in energy that had to do with power use for data centers, but not really having to do with AI. You know, it was
Right.
just a carve out. And
Right.
that's the quick overview. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brian. That's very helpful. We have time for maybe one question. If somebody has a question for Ken or for Brian, or something that brings that all together. If not, I think we will transition right to energy resources. But let me pause for a second and see if there are any hands up looking to ask a question. There you go. Thanks for killing the screen, Scott. Okay. I didn't see any hands. Scott, if you saw something, or Dan, if you saw something I missed, let me know. But I do think we want to move on. Thank Ken and Brian very much. It's really helpful in terms of helping us navigate our AI journey. And we're going to now have two short presentations on how AI might impact the energy grid here in Maine and nationally. Again, we'll start big with Sarah Smith from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and she can help us better understand how this is playing out across the country. And then we'll turn to Dan Burgess. So Sarah, if you've got 10 minutes for just sort of the national perspective, we'd really love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and we put out reports tracking or estimating energy use across data centers across the entire US. And we have a lot of other research on this topic. I have just like two figures just to kind of help give visual to the numbers I'm going to be talking about, and then a laundry list of some other thoughts that might be interesting for follow-ups and questions. So this first slide is a very compressed version of a history of the reports LBL has put out in the past. When we first started tracking data center energy use, my colleagues started tracking it back in the 2000s. We were seeing a doubling of electricity use every 5 years. And there was a lot of thought that that would continue and lead to a big crisis and take over. But we thought, there were some opportunities for efficiency and things like that that could lower that trajectory. Around the time of the financial crisis, we started to see a big shift in that pattern, and we saw energy use being quite flat actually throughout the 2010s. And a lot of this was due to gains in efficiency that came from moving from small distributed data centers into the cloud, where servers are run more efficiently. You have fewer servers running at higher utilization levels. You also have much more efficient cooling systems and just a more optimized system overall. When we wrote our last report in 2016, or it came out in 2016, we were doing the work in 2014, 2015. We thought, hey, maybe we'll keep cruising here. Maybe we can save a little more energy with efficiency. All's good. And then we turned our backs and, AI happened. And so you can see our latest numbers, slight correction in the historical estimate, but then a really rapid growth. This is just leading up to 2023 in this figure. GPUs came on the scene, started being rapidly rolled out and run for AI applications. And, a lot of those efficiency gains we had seen throughout the 2010s were in a sense sort of maxed out. We were doing really well with cooling systems. We were, already doing a lot of things right. So as the demand for the computing services has grown, it's been a linear, relationship between how much computing we're trying to do and the energy use associated with that. So this figure was kind of our headline result from the report we put out this last December. I'll make sure I send a link to this report in case for anyone who hasn't seen it. We go through, it's a bottom-up model. We track servers that are shipped, storage and networking devices. We estimate what's the power draw of those devices, how are they being operated, where are the facilities, what are the cooling systems. We really build this up from the ground up to get these numbers. And so there's a lot of rich information in that report about, everything that goes into that. There's also breakouts of these numbers by different types of facilities, different types of servers, things like that. But the top line number is that, 2018, which was kind of right when we started seeing the GPUs come online, AI start to pick up, we estimate that data centers were taking up about 2% of our national electricity consumption. And just in the short time between 2018 and 2023, that more than doubled to 4.4%. And so where we see things going, there's a lot of caveats to, any forecast you see on data centers, on AI, I'm sure you all know this, when it comes to energy, when it comes to anything, huge grain of salt. But our best understanding of where things are going in the next few years is that, these data centers will be 7 to 12% of US energy use. The uncertainty or the kind of variation between those bounds that we modeled relates to how many of these GPUs or AI accelerator chips more broadly, how many of those are really getting sent out. That's the main driver of this unknown. And really, when it comes to how we modeled this, the lower scenario, we use forecasts that we had received from our data provider colleagues in 2023, what they were forecasting, and the high line is what they were forecasting 1 year later in 2024. So again, it's changing really fast. There's a lot of unknowns, but that kind of is what feeds into this. And then there's also some variation in what we assume about how those servers are being run and what the cooling systems look like. And then this is my sort of like rapid fire list of things we're thinking about right now, things that have already, are coming more onto the scene since this December report came out. I'll kind of just note a few of them as I use my last few minutes here, but welcome any follow-ons or discussions or questions if people have them. So as I mentioned, forecasting is extremely difficult. For the timeline that we show, we have data on facilities that are under construction, orders that have been placed for computing equipment. There's some grounding to all of this, but when you see stuff going out further than that, it's really kind of just more of a thought exercise than anything real. And I understand that's really challenging for grid planners and for policymakers, because sometimes you really need to know where things are going on a 10-year, 15-year time span. But the best thing you can do is do your decision making in the face of this uncertainty, because you just really can't say what's going to happen further out. Considerations for where this is also a very localized issue, a very localized growth we're seeing. Those fractions I put up on the last slide were as a percentage of national demand, but if you look in Northern Virginia, if you look in certain markets, the data centers are a much larger fraction that electricity use. And the drivers for siting is, access to electricity is the biggest one right now, but you also need fiber, you need land. There is a draw towards, where the existing facilities are, just the users and kind of the data stores to help with the speed of all the calculations. But this varies a bit by what you're trying to use the facility for. And then, there's rapid advancements happening in the efficiency of chips and AI models, the calculations. You see headlines about DeepSeek or different things about, oh, it actually doesn't take that much energy. But the general thinking is that anything we gain in energy efficiency will pretty much be eaten up by, we're just going to do more with it. So it's the like Jevons paradox. People talk about a lot in this space. So it's really, you look at like what's being built, what's being ordered and kind of think about like that energy will get used for a while. Yeah, a few more thoughts here, you know, around load shapes, load flexibility, the load profiles. There are a lot of concerns around grid stability that come from this. I know, you know, and we'll talk about this a bit, what's going on in Maine. I know there's not a lot of data center activity, but, you know, if you think about the ISO, the New England ISO as a whole, Boston, you know, there are a lot of facilities that could have impacts on peak energy prices on the wholesale markets or things like that. So some of these aspects might be useful to understand for the energy planners in the group. So I think I'm about close enough on time. So I'll go ahead.
There you go. Thank you, Sarah. And the key takeaway there is that it feels like it's right to be focused on energy as a resource as it's growing as a proportion to the total energy consumption. So we'll have some questions for you after, but right now we're going to turn to Dan Burgess from Maine's Energy Office. And Dan, you prepared a memo for the committee. It was very thorough. Appreciate that. Wonder if you'd spend just a few minutes providing an overview.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. And I'm happy to be here to talk about energy impacts and to follow Sarah's excellent presentation and summary of national trends. Hard to do that in a quick time period, but I think Sarah's report and expertise is really a great asset. We work with Lawrence Berkeley Lab in a number of different areas, and exciting to have Sarah here. So thanks for that. So the Governor's Energy Office, as this group knows, we are, we'll be transitioning to a department at some point in the near future per new legislation, which we're excited about. But we are responsible for a myriad planning and programming and initiatives across the state. And one of them is the state energy plan. So we produced a state energy plan earlier this year, looking at just how, you know, what our energy future will look like. What will the growth in electricity demand look like, and how are we going to plan for the resources to make sure that we're doing so in an affordable, reliable, and increasingly cleaner energy future. So I think that when it comes to AI, and what you can see in this memo are two things. One, obviously the importance of planning for and understanding what additional electric load growth might look like. And I think the other side of that is the opportunity of AI to help manage the energy system, and particularly the electric grid, and how best to utilize them. As Sarah mentioned, there are a number of different forecasts of what electricity load growth could look like based on kind of what consultants' version. They could be quite steep, and I think you could see that in that gray bar that Sarah presented. It could be you know, lower, it could be quite steep. In Maine, we share, as Sarah mentioned, an electric grid with the other New England states. And so as we think about using more electricity, we need to be thinking about that not just from a Maine perspective, but in coordination with the other New England states. We are likely to see our electric load growth double to meet beneficial electrification targets. So as we all use more air conditioning and are installing heat pumps for heating and cooling, heat pump hot water heaters, use of electric vehicles, more electrification in hard to decarbonize sectors like large-scale transportation, heavy transportation, and the industrial sector, we're going to see load growth, and we're planning for that. What we are going to be doing more of, though, is looking at what does, let's just call it lumpier load growth look like. We've got a steady state of, you know, a trend of load growth, but what happens when if a data center comes in and, you know, what is that at a certain time period, and there's more increased growth. And the issues there, I'll be can kind of finish up, is where would this be? How is it paid for? You know, right now it's generally when a new manufacturer comes on, it's generally that manufacturer that is paying for the electric grid upgrades. But if we're planning for socializing kind of larger scale upgrades, you know, how those costs are paid for, or how is really important for ratepayers. I need to make sure that we're thinking about the existing clean energy resources that we have that kind of meet what AI and data centers might need, this kind of continuous 24/7 load, which could be things like hydropower, kind of how are we looking at those existing resources that we have? And then overall, I think it's, we're not seeing, there have been kind of scattered announcements of interest around data centers in Maine and around New England, but in comparison to the states like Virginia, California, these other larger states, we're just not seeing that yet. I think some of that is result of where the technology is starting. It's not unlikely that we would see something down the road. We're just not kind of seeing that hyperscale growth targeted for Maine quite yet. So we, from a state policy perspective in this group, I think need to continue to keep these issues at the forefront, thinking about our energy planning. We work closely with the National Association of State Energy Officials and hear what other states are doing from a policy and regulatory perspective. Heard NGA talk about from a kind of a some non-energy items. From an energy perspective, we are talking to other states to figure out how they're dealing with this and really kind of seeing it where it might be an opportunity. And then finally, this time it will really be finally, I think we are excited about how AI might be able to help us manage the grid more effectively and more efficient. And I think we're seeing new technologies and new uses, some of them being used here in Maine at our utilities, others potentially being developed at places like the Rue Institute, where Clean Tech and Climate Tech are using AI to help improve not just how the grid is run, but come up with other innovations that are possible in helping us meet our energy future. So hopefully that's helpful. Happy to take questions and give all the hard ones to Sarah, who is clearly the expert in this. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. And we do have time for questions. I appreciate that main perspective. Let's lead in with the questions. We've got just a couple minutes, but Andrew, I noticed you had a question for Dan, so we'll start there.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much. And actually, maybe a dual question both for Dan as well as Dr. Smith. Thanks so much for both your time and input today. Really just the point regarding advances in efficiency and AI capability in utility system optimization just makes me think about, Dan, the work that you all have done in expanding our smart grid capability, our planning process, our distributed generation systems. And I guess I'm just curious, Dr. Smith in particular, if you have any perspective on considerations relevant to smaller distributed data centers and the correlation with distributed energy generation and distributed population.
Yeah, so depends what you consider smaller. What we used to think of was large 6 years ago is small now. So I will say for those, so for certain facility sizes, maybe smaller than like the really big announcements you see, but still, big standalone facilities. You hear a lot of talk about small modular reactors, nuclear, things like that. And we do, we are researching solar and battery microgrids for data centers. It's especially in the landscape of limitations on grid capacity. If you could build something like that faster, there is value there. These companies do have clean energy targets and goals and, carbon goals. So there is still a lot of, when I, say they cite based on access to power, a lot of times clean power is like really what they're after. So there's that kind of like distributed or smaller distributed, but then really kind of small throughout like a metropolitan area, throughout typical buildings. There was a lot of talk about the edge being a big trend, a big concern before AI really took over the conversation. I'm not sure where that's going, but the idea was that, with self-driving cars and with certain technologies, you would need, basically little data centers on every corner doing the telemetry, doing, certain processes to have really, really quick response speeds to certain applications. Now some companies, they still talk about the edge, but they talk about, my cell phone is the edge, my laptop is the edge, my car, is doing computing as the edge. So I'm not quite sure what the future holds for like kind of building by building distributed data centers. I think there's a lot of really cool opportunities like you said, with distributed energy resources, with waste heat recovery, you know, free hot water for everyone in the building. But it's not something that's really top of mind for people right now.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're seeing a lot of the at least data center proposals be, you know, of the 100 megawatt plus. I think there are some smaller ones, as Dr. Smith has mentioned, but you know, really 100 to 300 megawatts of continuous power. I think cleaner energy preferred, but oftentimes I think, at least what I'm reading, is that these are oftentimes sited next to natural gas infrastructure, paired with, you know, could be paired with solar storage, or certainly batteries as a backup, or hydro with other assets. So I think from an energy perspective, there's you know, opportunity on kind of what we've been working on already, but then I think it's opening up new technologies, geothermal, again, SMRs, as small modular reactors, as Sarah mentioned, fusion. We've got a Commonwealth fusion systems out of Massachusetts building a facility in Virginia, and in part, I think, based on more load growth. So new technologies that maybe you hadn't thought of a while ago, to what was being discussed as being options to look at in the future.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot there for consideration. We do have a question in the Q&A from an attendee. I think if we can, that's talking about Texas and you know, having data centers in Texas where they're sitting on top of fossil fuel energy resources. Maybe we'll try and address that separately and get that back out to folks. Dan and Sarah, I want to thank you for your time. And what I'd like to do at this point is see if we can just transition to John Bredigan. And John's going to take us through a panel discussion on AI literacy and awareness. So, John, if you're ready for us, we'll have you take us away and lead the panel.
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon. My name is John Brodigan. I'm a public policy advocate with an organization called Legal Services for Maine Elders. A large share of our work includes helping older Mainers who are victimized by online scams. And we see in our work every day that AI is already making these scams more realistic and easier to produce. And we've also heard here in the task force conversations about the opportunities that AI offers, from improving medical care to creating new jobs. But those opportunities will require AI fluency for Mainers to safely navigate. So today we are joined by three excellent panelists who are going to help us explore ways Maine could expand AI literacy among the public. We have about 25 minutes. I hope we can save a few minutes at the end for questions. And so now I'm delighted to invite to our virtual stage here three great panelists. I'm joined by Jeff Lane from Bipartisan Policy Center, Kara Rothman from the Utah State Library, and Jackie Farwell from GoPIF right here in Maine. So I'm going to start with quick introductions. I would like to ask each of our panelists to, again, state your name and your role and where you're coming from today, and a little bit of your background for about a minute each. And we'll start with Jeff, and then we'll go to Kara and Jackie.
Thanks. And thank you for including the Bipartisan Policy Center in today's discussion. It's quite an honor to speak with you all today. My name is Jeff Lane, and I serve as Director for Technology and AI Policy on the Bipartisan Policy Center Action Team. In this role, I cover an array of policy issues, including emerging technologies like AI, to privacy, to online safety. Now in our second year of our AI literacy campaign, we're working to ensure that policymakers know what AI is, what it isn't, and making sure we're all singing from the same songbooks and using the same vocabulary when we're talking about AI. What this project doesn't do is endorse legislation. We're merely an avenue to demystify AI, the data centers that power it, and the issues that it may create, both positive and negative, for Americans around the country. We have found that while policymakers and their staff will tell you that they are fairly familiar with AI. That isn't always the case. Surprise, surprise. Too often, policymakers see AI as beginning and ending with things like large language models. AI is much more than that. It can be as basic as the maps, GPS programs on our phones, to autocorrect in our emails, to predicting what movies we might be interested in streaming platforms. We found that there's roughly an 80-15-5 split among policymakers and their staff. That's to say that 80% will tell you they know a lot about AI, but the reality is they just have a cursory understanding. 15% know enough to be dangerous, and 5% are highly proficient in the subject matter. This is all to say that there's quite a bit of room for better understanding of what AI is.
Jeff, let me, sorry to interrupt you. Let me just go through the introductions, and then I have some questions for the panel, and we'll get back to your content. So Kara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kara Rothman. I'm the director of the Utah State Library. We are a state agency that supports primarily public libraries across the state in a variety of ways through training, and we are stewards of state and federal grants. We also run the Bookmobile program for rural Utah and the Library for the Blind and Visually Impaired. A little bit of my background: I grew up in New England. I've only been in Utah for just about a year, so it's nice to be among New Englanders. And prior to becoming a state librarian, I was a director, assistant director, children's librarian, reference librarian in public libraries in Massachusetts and New Hampshire.
Right. Thank you, Kara. And now, Jackie, you want to give us a little introduction?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Glad to be with you. I'm Jackie Farwell. I'm a deputy director at GoPIF. I joined GoPIF in September of 2019. Prior to that, I served as the communications director at the Maine Department of Health and Human Services. I'm also stepping in today for Sarah Curran, our director, who's off this week and is a member of the task force. So happy to be with you all.
Thanks, Jackie. And so, Jeff, thank you for letting me interrupt you there. Let's get back to you. The Bipartisan Policy Center, your organization has been out ahead of a lot of other organizations in thinking about how to spread AI literacy. And I know you were starting to get into that, but from your perspective, let's just start with, why do you think it's important for the government to focus on AI literacy? What are some of the reasons for that?
It's a great question. The need for both an AI literate group of policymakers and constituents has never been greater. AI will soon be intersecting, if it isn't already, every sector of the economy. Make no mistake, many of the changes AI will be driving are for the better. Excuse me. But there are very real concerns lawmakers should be considering. From a jobs perspective, it's imperative that policymakers take steps to ensure their constituents are armed with the skills today's economy requires. We published a blog post in May 2024 that doubled down on this position. We basically said that AI, we basically said that AI is permeating even the most routine digital products. Everything from GPS to fitness trackers to spam filters to movie recommendations depend on AI technologies.
So have you been able to identify any specific goals for what AI literacy should be aiming to achieve, and what success would look like?
Yeah, I think ultimately success is making sure that the entire universe of constituents has access to AI literacy materials. That means ensuring that afternoon pick me up. That means that everybody from community centers to schools to government agencies are producing AI literacy materials folks to better understand what AI is.
And we don't really have anybody naturally in the nonprofit sector or in the private sector who's playing this role. But do you think that the government can play a role as a convener, a thought leader, identifying risks for folks in the public side?
I think that's right. In the absence of federal activity, there's certainly a role for state and localities to play a key role in this. I expect that Congress won't be able to get any wholesale AI changes across the finish line, but on things like AI literacy reforms, there's a really good opportunity for states and localities to act here.
So have you all been able to develop an idea of what states, action in this area can look like? Is it just about, letting people know that there is this thing called AI, or is it deeper and broader than that?
No, it's really about baby steps. It's making sure that first and foremost, folks, whether or not they're students in school or they're displaced workers or they're older folks, understand what AI is, what it isn't, making sure that they're comfortable with AI, and making sure that they are ready for the job augmentation and job displacement that may come with the widespread deployment of AI. This isn't just about upskilling, students. It's not just about upskilling displaced workers. I think you mentioned at the outset, we need to make sure that older folks are also comfortable around AI and know, things like when they're being scammed, and when like the Nigerian prince, if you will, is sending them an email to beg for money. This is a whole of government approach. This means that folks, like I said earlier, whether or not they're schools or community centers or the government is reaching out to all constituents, because like I said, AI is permeating nearly every sector of the economy, if it isn't already. The jobs, everything from the shop floor, the blue collar jobs, to the white collar jobs in law firms and radiologists, for instance, are going to be affected by the widespread deployment of AI. I know I sound like I'm all doom and gloom. There is good that can come from AI. There's a lot of good that can come from AI, but we need to make sure that folks are ready and prepared for those negative effects that may also occur.
And a final quick question for Jeff. Do you I see a need for like templates or models of how to do that, provide this kind of education towards literacy. And I believe you have at the Policy Center, AI 101 series. Have you been rolling that out, and has that been effective?
We've been doing it for about 2 years now. It's been very effective. We've had about 700 touch points between states and Congress over the past 2 years. And as I was saying in the outset, it's very much an 80-15-5 split. 80% will tell you they know a lot about AI, when reality is that they don't. 15% know enough to be dangerous, and really only about 5% of policymakers know enough to really craft thoughtful policy in this space. So we have our work cut out for us. This has been a very rewarding project, just because we are making sure that folks are really prepared and doubling down and girding for what might be an all-encompassing change in the economy.
Thank you very much. Kara, I want to pivot to you, bring you into the conversation here. As the head of the state library system, I'm so pleased that my local library is thriving, even in the time of the ubiquitous, handheld devices. But say a little bit more for us about how libraries have historically played a role in expanding access to new information and new means of communication.
So fundamentally, libraries are mission-driven organizations. And their role historically has been they value patrons' experiences, their enrichment, education, their privacy, and meeting their needs of the community. Every public library is unique because every community is unique. I'll also say that libraries are connectors. Librarians themselves are connectors. They're connecting people with information, resources, services, materials that they need to address whatever their question is or whatever their interest is. So I can give a ton of examples of how libraries have made this happen in the past. There's kind of the rise of addressing the digital divide starting long ago and supporting seniors or undereducated patrons on how to utilize computers and mobile devices. And that came in the form of training that's self-run through databases. It's one-on-one training with librarians. It's open labs where patrons can come in and get their specific questions answered. I also think libraries are, they still maintain a high level of trust in the community. There was a Pew research done, I just looked it up. It was way back in 2017, but about 80% of Americans still trusted libraries and felt as though they could go there for trusted, reliable information and support from staff there. Some of that may have shifted in the last 7 years. We're also well placed because we're connected to other at the local level, municipal departments and agencies. Even at the state level, for example, we have been in touch with the AI Policy Center in Utah and having these broader conversations of how do we get information into the public, in front of the public, and libraries typically are an excellent place to do that. They're also community gathering places where people are coming in and out of, or even if they're remote users, they're on their website and seeing that information.
So that's great. Let me touch on that a little bit more. Are you working on ways in which to incorporate AI literacy into your existing activities and structures across the state?
Sure. I have a couple examples here of how we're doing that. So we're starting with ourselves at the state library. We have a very close relationship with the 60 public library directors across the state, and they rely on us to take the lead on anything that's new and innovative and things that are maybe beyond library land, but that are impacting their patrons and eventually their work too. So we've hosted but prior to my arrival, we hosted a grant for AI incorporation for librarians to use AI tools to get familiar with it. We also host an annual director summit where we plan to open up conversation and have discussions about AI and how we can best meet the needs that they have and that their patrons have. We have a very robust training program here through the state library that our librarians utilize all the time, and really addressing that or using that model of train the trainers, get our librarians out in the public equipped, therefore they can help the general public. At a national level, we were part of a group called SLATE, which stands for the State Libraries and AI Technologies Working Group, which was through the University of Texas. And that since has ended, but we will maintain that conversation at a national level. And instead of trying to all invent the wheel individually, we're all going to work together to see how we can come up with actual educational resources for people to use. And I'm also working with it's in its very early stages, a pilot program with the Salt Lake City Public Library. And they're working with Josh Tan, and he's creating basically an AI kiosk for the general public to use. And it has not made its way to the Salt Lake City Library just yet, but the plan is to have their staff play around with it and give him feedback on the user experience and then eventually set up these kiosks in potentially each of their branches to give people some experience and understanding in a safe place where their data isn't necessarily being collected. And
Well,
I have one more example. I sit on the board of the Utah Education Network and the Utah Academic Library Consortium Board. And I'm in those conversations with public educators and then higher ed or secondary ed as well. And I think that's a good place to be. So we're all in the know and sharing what the needs are and how we can fill in the gaps.
thank you, Kara. I look forward to learning more about your success in Utah. Let's pivot to Jackie and talk a little bit about what's going on here in Maine. As we think about how to reach out to Mainers around AI, what lessons have you learned from other public messaging campaigns, either at GoPIF or elsewhere, about what works, what's really clicked for Mainers, anything that didn't work, and how would we approach this here in our state?
Sure. Thank you, John. When I think about strengthening awareness and literacy around any sort of new and emerging phenomenon, particularly from the perspective of government, I think what we are good at and what we're practiced at is warning people about dangers and action steps to protect themselves. So whether it's a drug or a disease or some other kind of danger, those are the types of campaigns I think that we are most practiced at and know how to do. I think back to my public health background in regards to a lot of the campaigns around COVID, both initially earlier in the pandemic in terms of just warning people about what COVID was as it was sort of coming onto the scene, identifying symptoms, steps they could take, including hand washing, social isolation, masking to protect themselves, and then later on in the pandemic, getting information to folks about vaccination. I think about campaigns around drug overdoses, and so again, the danger there, identifying the types of drugs that are circulating at any given time, and warning signs of an overdose, and action steps around availability and administration of Narcan. John, I know you'll be familiar with the campaigns around elder abuse, which also come to mind for me as another one where we've done a lot of work around identifying the types of risks that older folks can be subject to, and having action steps around reporting and calling a hotline and making sure that those types of instances are reported to authorities. I think what we are less practiced at is elevating the positives around any sort of new emerging technology or phenomenon as it's emerging, and creating comfort around that, and so that advancements can continue to come forward and be embraced. I think about campaigns, the most sort of analogous, I think, to AI would be around social media. Again, those tend to be around the risks, particularly to youth, and campaigns around cybersecurity, again, protecting yourself from risks, hackers, malware, phishing attempts, that kind of thing. And so I think in regards to AI, the challenge, which is inherent in so much of the work on this topic, I think, is to balance the messaging about both the risks and the benefits.
Are there any really high-level tools or tactics or general strategies that should guide an education effort?
I think so. I mean, AI does feel like a little bit of a unique beast, but I think some of the themes that come to mind for me are actually some that were touched on earlier on in this conversation around transparency, humility, continuous adaptation. I think will be true for messaging campaigns related to AI. I think when I think about the COVID campaign, there are a lot of parallels in terms of AI being a very emotionally loaded subject, and people can be coming to it with a lot of pre-existing beliefs and notions that can make it difficult for messaging to take hold. I think about the uncertainty of risk and the variation of risk across a population, different parts of the population having different understanding and perceptions of their risk, and it just generally being an overwhelming and complex topic that's perceived as having a momentum of its own, particularly early on. So I think some of the lessons learned there are around being just frank and honest about what is known and what isn't known. I think there can be a fear there, and acknowledging what we don't know, that we won't have credibility with the audience. But I think very often when that message is conveyed, when the information just isn't there yet, that actually can create more credibility with an audience. And so I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. Reckoning with the skepticism, knowing that it's out there, and addressing it head on through facts and trusted messengers. I can't think of maybe more trusted messengers in our community than local librarians.
Yeah.
Continuing to publish facts and information as it comes in, making that publicly available to anyone who wants to see it, and pointing to specific actions that individuals can take to make a difference. Around the campaigns related to elder abuse and drug overdoses, I think thinking about the specific calls to action will be really important around any of these campaigns. Making those actions as easy as possible, removing costs, removing barriers, and gathering and sharing positive examples and anecdotes about the application of AI. I think as things progress, the potential downfalls and the risks of AI and the stories related to that they'll be there, they'll be clear. But I think the stories around the benefits of AI will be a little harder to get arms around. So I think there'll probably need to be some effort there to collecting those stories as things move forward.
Great, thank you. I do think we're out of time. I'm not sure we're going to have time for questions. But Jackie, Kara, Jeff, thank you very much for your sharing your insights and your wisdom and experience with this task force. We appreciate it.
John, thank you for leading the conversation. And again, Kara, Jeff, and Jackie, thank you. We have a lot that we can digest. I think we're going to take a little bit of a break. We would like to try and reconvene by 3:20, if that's okay with everyone. So we're going to shorten up our break a little bit, try and keep ourselves on schedule, and then we'll move forward. And Mary is going to help lead us through a discussion, taking all of this information that we've gathered and trying to see if we can unpack it and begin to develop the information we need for a report. So feel free to turn your camera off, go on mute for a bit. If you can be back here right at 3:20, not a lot of time, but we'd appreciate it, and we'll get going again. Thank you.
All right, folks, I think we are going to come back together here. And I'll give the mic back over to you, Mary.
Thanks so much. Welcome back, everyone, from a restful 3-minute break, and let's tackle some discussion. So, as is our pattern, we'd like to cover what stood out to you most for the speakers that we heard today. How can the state work to protect Maine people from AI-related harms and expand AI literacy? And do we, as always, we ask, do we have the right questions to be assigned to the subgroup focused on this topic? And since we happen to have 3 legislators on, maybe we can start with comments from Senator Grohowski, Senator Libby, or Representative Sayre. Maybe they're not back yet. Oh, maybe they are. Good.
I'm back and
Go
ahead, Nicole.
Okay, I'll go first since my name was listed first alphabetically. Good to see everyone. Nicole Grohowski, I represent Senate District 7, which is most of Hancock County. I live in Ellsworth. I've been thinking a lot about our role as legislators and really enthusiastic about what might come from this task force. I would say, like, I had a lot of ideas about legislation, but I decided not to put any in because I didn't want to preempt the work of the task force. But I am glad that a couple bills move forward. And I do want to sort of lift up a little bit more than Brian did, LD 1822, which is Representative Kuhn's act to enact the Maine Online Data Privacy Act, because I think that does have a lot of importance for consumers of materials on the internet to protect them beyond just regular data privacy. And the principle behind that, as I understood it, was data minimization. So companies really not being able to collect more than they needed to do and provide the services that the consumer is expecting. So I just wanted to sort of flag that a little more. That did come out of the Judiciary Committee, but has not received votes yet and was carried over. So just a quick thought there. Senator Libby, you were next.
Senator Libby. Maybe he got called away. Representative Sayre. Dan, do you want to say something?
Yeah. I had also wanted to flag 1822. There's a robust dialogue in state legislatures around the approach to data privacy. There's a wide reference to what's called the Connecticut model as being one that doesn't really incorporate data minimization, although I'm aware that the legislators in Connecticut are seeing that as something that as first movers they did not incorporate and are looking to incorporate now. So that is something that will be an important element of next session. The state's data privacy regime really is an underpinning of AI regulation. So what we've done, these were both bills sponsored by Amy Kuhn with an assist from me. The deep fakes of non-consensual intimate images was passed, and the chatbots disclosure bill was passed. And that's the kind of low-hanging fruit that you can do on a bipartisan basis absent a comprehensive data privacy bill, but more will really require that. Representative Kuhn and I both serve on a couple of national groups looking at AI data privacy and cybersecurity, one of which is an NCSL effort that will be meeting in August, where we'll get more of a download on some of the things that are being done. I know that there's quite a bit of energy around regulating data brokers, and that collection of, it's not really an AI application. Well, AI is applied to the massive collection and interpretation of data that we may not have actually chosen to disclose as consumers. Speaking about data centers, I recall that there was thank you, Nicole. There was a bill that I'm forgetting the disposition of to make sure that data centers did not trump consumer use of added generation capacity in the state. And so those issues of distributed generation or even microgrids is one that I think the legislature will be looking at in the future, as we continue down a path that now has more obstacles thrown in its way around developing renewable energy generation in the state. Yeah, as Ken Hardy pointed out, I think we dodged a bullet with avoiding the preemption effort at the federal level that would have closed off state action on AI. It's certainly possible that states will do more harm than good in legislating something that has both ills and benefits. But I am much more confident in giving the 50 laboratories of democracy a chance to develop legislation and learn from one another. And there are robust conversations among legislators in different states learning from one another. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Senator Libby, back to you.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Apologies for the delay. I first want to thank the Governor's Energy Office. Probably the best thing I read was might have been a two-pager that talked a little bit about what some of the other states are doing, like Virginia, and some excellent stuff on impediments to energy generation and other issues that were related. I think, as most of you know, I'm on the Education Committee, so my concern is primarily around how does K-12 deal with AI as it kind of continues to roll out. What we do know is that all students are using AI now. Some are using it as a shortcut to complete assignments, and that part of it really could use some information from administrators and the state DOE in terms of allowing for some more training for teachers and a better understanding of just how to deal with the current use. I think there's also a curriculum issue that we need to take a look at. And, some people have approached me and said, well, we really should deal with this across the curriculum. And I don't really think so. I think AI courses for upper level students or for stronger students that really want to, AI is not for everybody, especially the innovative portions of it. And so, but rolling out courses is something that not every RSU has the ability to do quickly. You need teacher prep, teacher training. But reminds me a lot of, the way that schools adapted to things like, when Excel spreadsheets first came out and a lot of other, similar kind of rollouts. It's sometimes the technology is a little bit ahead of our ability to teach it and the ability for students to learn it. Students will learn it on their own, but it's the use toward innovation that is really what we want to focus on. So I'm kind of thinking more along the terms of trying to analyze what schools are doing now and looking at what some other states are doing before we get involved too much in the legislation side of things.
Excellent comments. Are there others that want to comment on the comments made by legislators or want to weigh in on the original questions about what was most impactful from what you heard? Or are we doing enough to protect folks and expand literacy? There's been some active discussion in the chat. Andrew's had a number of interesting comments. I don't know if, Andrew, you want to reflect on those or bring those out?
Sure, happy to, and I hope use of chat is okay. I know with tight timing, there's just never enough time. I think it is, given the prior literacy conversation, just really important to underscore the extent of activity in motion under the state's digital equity and inclusion plan, of which I provided a link, and many of you have had a key part in forming allowing for the deployment of about 20 million of funds to date, investing in our digital literacy and inclusion programs and partners. And so glad for the partnership with the Maine State Library and the Maine State Library Network and the University of Maine and Maine Community College System. And I would say that we are at a pretty critical inflection point. We know that a significant, whether it's digital literacy or whether it is AI literacy, these are sort of part and parcel. And with 90% of the state's population being structurally impacted by the digital divide, you can imagine that as we expand upon the skills and expertise necessary to make the most of the AI economy, this issue is going to exacerbate significantly. And especially given that over 35 million in funding for expanding that digital literacy and skill ecosystem has been terminated. So I think we've known the problem is big. The FBI report that indicated the 31 million in cybersecurity crimes in 2023 is one data point to that effect. So I think that this conversation is so timely, and I definitely am glad for the opportunity to get input from others as to what are the legislative interventions and what is the, I mean, frankly, at this point, a lot of the creative partnerships that will be necessary to tap into the opportunities of the AI economy, but ensure the literacy component is addressed at the forefront.
I think that's great.
And if folks have questions regarding some of the digital equity and inclusion programming and the both plan and funding deployed, please by all means reach out, and happy to address directly.
Anyone else want to comment on that or add to that? Dan?
Thanks, Mary. Not in response to that, but just a general comment on the data center and the power discussion. You know, I was glad that Sarah mentioned it in her presentation around the efficiency gains that that we're, you know, seeing with some of the technology. I'm sure everyone remembers when DeepSeek was announced and NVIDIA stock dropped, you know, like a rock that day. I don't think we're done with seeing those kinds of gains. So I do absolutely feel that we need to be focused on this issue. Over the long term, I'm not entirely convinced that we're going to see the meteoric rise in demand that some of those graphs portrayed, because the companies that are you know, most intensively utilizing and providing these tools for us have a financial incentive themselves to keep their own costs down. And so I do think that technology will continue to advance, and hopefully we won't see those dramatic power needs continue to escalate as they've done thus far. Again, who knows what the truth will be down the road, but I'm optimistic that we'll be able to bend that curve.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was fascinated by what she showed, and also mindful of the fact that there's a shared power grid. It's not just one state, but it's multiple states, and I want to make sure that we're doing enough to sort of gauge how that will be balanced and how it will be utilized, and any vulnerabilities that might come about as those grids are shared in this context. So it made me think of that, and I'm sure there's others that know more about that than I do. Having moved here from Texas, where it's not a shared grid, but when it goes down, it goes really down. Then that we experienced some of those vulnerabilities in our previous neighborhoods. But others, I'm sure, know much more about that. Is that something on the task force that we need to be concerned about or get into or bring to light? I'm not hearing a rally cry for that.
Sorry, Mary, can you clarify your question?
The question is really about the shared usage of grids and whether any increases, whether we need to be cognizant of the New England neighborhood with respect to AI coming on in any particular way, particularly with neighbors to the south that might be also utilizing the grid, and how that will be effectuated as these things come forward.
If I may, just I think as a subset of that, because I think it's part of what you're prompting. It strikes me, based upon the input that Dan shared from a governor's energy office standpoint, and that I feel like I've heard from DECD, it strikes me that some form of up-to-date analysis, feasibility, identification of key considerations regarding our overall data center strategy, especially as it pertains to energy systems, would be useful. And it strikes me that some of that analysis has been started from a geo standpoint and may very well benefit from a dedicated focus from a expanded AI utilization and constraint standpoint, based upon what Dr. Smith shared with us today. Is that addressing some of your question?
Mm-hmm. Senator Grahowski, maybe you can.
Well, I would just underscore what was in the memo and what Dan presented, that unless there's a really compelling reason for the data center computation to be happening close to the source of the data request, which I'm not sure that there necessarily is, based on the bandwidth availability, the cost of energy, electricity in New England is so much greater than in other places. It feels really something we need to keep an eye on, but it doesn't feel like we are going to be the place that data centers want to come to. So I feel personally that it doesn't need to be in the purview of the task force, just something that I would hope that the GO and, working broadly with the ISO New England grid operator would keep an eye on. But I don't see it as a really burgeoning issue for us compared to the broad scope of everything else we're looking at.
Excellent.
If I could just jump in, if anything, it's for more investment in improving our connectivity in the state, just because, to Nicole's point, it's not likely that the major sources of, the computing that we're talking about are going to be local to us. And so being able to ensure connectivity to all parts of the state is probably the most critical aspect of enabling AI in those places.
Okay. Other points that anyone wants to raise? How about keeping, oh, go ahead, Chris, please.
I was going to not, but I think I'll just, for the sake of discussion, just take the counterpoint position a little bit on this energy opportunity issue. Not necessarily because I know anything about energy or the cost of power or the electrical grid, but just every day I'm reading about these massive investments that are happening in other states through private partnerships, and some of them, just in today's Wall Street Journal in Pennsylvania, driving really interesting innovation opportunities around the way power is even generated and distributed in order to enable the data center opportunity. So fully respecting what each of our colleagues have just shared, and by no means an energy, even not, let alone an expert, even a novice, it just seems to me that among the things we might recommend is a continued sort of focus to get in those conversations and get in the game, because as I said, every day from New Mexico to Texas to Pennsylvania, there are multi-billion-dollar investments being made to create jobs and new innovations and opportunities around this energy and data center opportunity to power the AI economy. And I don't know if we're trying and we're just not competitive, or if we haven't really taken the right run at it as a state yet.
Interesting. Interesting. maybe we'll switch gears and I'll ask, we've talked a lot about AI literacy as a way to combat some of the misunderstood demons or make people more comfortable with technology. What would success look like in an AI literacy program? Where would we put a check in the win column for our efforts if we were able to launch something? It's not even Friday afternoon. Okay. Adopt, would it be widespread? Okay, go ahead, Andrew, help me out.
Mary, I come from a big family. I just can't sit and listen. I can't sit with the silence. So please feel free to shut me up. I don't want to over participate. I do think that success around AI literacy, I think, builds from much of the success. And I know Commissioner Makin's here and provided some links to some of the Department of Education's work. I think as we look at our entire education ecosystem, where we are able to use the findings from this task force to layer in concentrated nodes of expertise and resources and incorporate into our existing education delivery. And when we look at that through a connectivity and from a digital equity standpoint, it is with those that are most impacted by a structural divide. And so using programs like digital navigator programs through the National Digital Equity Center, and building in links to some of the curricula through the community college system, through the RU, through the University of Maine system, and through our adult ed programs. And so I think in some ways a standardization of our both AI curriculum, as well as incentivizing expanded engagement through entrepreneurial programs, which I think, certainly the RU and University of Maine system's done so well. So I guess largely I would say, I think being intentional about leveraging our existing education delivery system with particular focus around those that have the least amount of digital literacy experience and familiarity and are at most risk for some of the earlier conversation today.
Okay, Justin?
Yeah, to piggyback off that point, I am in our legal risk subgroup. We had a really good conversation about this misinformation, manipulation, and cyber fraud sort of being rampant in Maine and being exacerbated by AI. And one of the things that relates directly to what Andrew just said was just like leveraging not just schools, but like libraries, town offices, maybe even credit unions, and other local institutions that are already trusted, because the core demographic that like is being targeted by a lot of the deception, whether it's like the Biden robocall deepfakes telling you to vote on a day that you can't actually vote, and don't worry about next Tuesday, or other fraudulent activities we've discussed, is the demographic that's targeted is like demographic that's no longer in schools and maybe hasn't been for decades. And so how do you leverage institutions that demographic participates in? And we've been exploring some of those that I previously mentioned.
That's great. Chris, is your hand up for this one or just still up from the last one? No, okay. Anyone else want to add on to that? What about in government sectors or the workforce, or how can literacy really be achieved, and what would be a way that we would see it in action, see those successes?
I guess I would just jump in there and echo the comments around building a coalition of trusted partners who have a harmonious and consistent message tailored to each of their audiences around this. I think a sort of a baseline goal to shoot for would be just increased awareness about when people are interacting with AI. Just knowing that that is something that is occurring in their daily life and being able to spot it. I think that would be a sort of a big hurdle to reach and a great goal to aim for. And then I would see the next layers on top of that would be learning how to identify specific risks, knowing how to respond to those risks, and then becoming more aware of the benefits, potential benefits of AI in folks' sort of daily and work lives.
That's great. I think the awareness aspect is really great. Are there models of what are your favorite models of the awareness part? And is it useful to let people know when they are the human in the loop? And that they have they're really in charge of the outcome, right? Nothing happens without their approval, kind of thing.
That's a good question. In terms of similar models, it's a little hard to find, I think, ones that are perfectly analogous to AI. But I think, I guess, just to return to the COVID campaign example, having folks recognize that, the symptoms of an illness. I mean, not that we think of AI as a disease or a threat in the same way, but I think there is a similar sort of baseline understanding of, oh, if this is something that I'm beginning to see in my daily life, I can recognize that as a phenomenon rather than a sort of scattered signs or symptoms. And so that's what comes to mind for me, but that's coming from my public health background. So I'm curious if folks have other examples.
Yeah, I think it's really about it doing you a favor as opposed to distracting you in some ways. Like I could think of examples where, you're shopping for vegetables and, something pops up and says, would you like a Volvo? And you're like, well, I'm shopping for vegetables. It's not helpful. But then they, if they say, well, there's been whatever grapes have been 10% sweeter this year, so we suggest you try blah, 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 then maybe that's more helpful, or that's a place where it gains acceptance because it's not a distraction and seem nonsensical. I don't know.
One thought here is if we're thinking about institutions that have already done a good job at AI literacy, the Maine State Bar Association and the Board of Bar Overseers, and then really like the Cumberland Bar Association has been pretty good. And I know that's a niche, not representative segment of a larger demographic of Maine, but it does, they do maybe demonstrate one of the core principles of AI literacy, which is like meeting people where they're at. Like what reading level are you at already? And like you're not going to jump from a flip phone to an iPhone 15 and get out of that unperplexed. So I think that one of the thoughts that example stirs in me is trying to find, right, where are the people who are the $32 million, I think I saw, in cyber crime, or $35 million terminated funding. I think, Andrew, you had shared it earlier, of internet-related crime in Maine. Where are those people at? What institutions is there overlap? And what could this group do to work with those institutions to say, hey, the people that work with you, the people that come into your town office once a week are getting screwed over. Here are some things you could do to help.
Dan?
Yeah, well, there are two sides to this, and what we're talking about was part of the motivating spirit for the disclosure bill about chatbots, and so disclosure around when a person is interacting with AI, I think, remains an important thing to require as the other side of the coin with education around how to recognize when you're dealing with an AI rather than an individual, and what to do, what kind of caution to have, what kinds of, there's all kinds of things that we've been sharing about telephone scams and about online scams. This is just the next layer of it. And it's more insidious because it's harder to distinguish, and it will become increasingly harder to distinguish.
Yeah, and I think it's always the case that in the education and adoption part, everybody wants to be upfront, but in the the more crime-oriented things where the object is to deceive, there will be less and less and less of that. So the expectation is that you'll be told, but then there will be a lot of people that will defy that and make use of that expectation, to negative consequences. That's always the difficulty, I think.
If I could follow up there, one of the things that's talked about a lot among legislators in the AI working group is you don't regulate technology, you regulate use cases. We certainly don't want to impede the use of AI chatbots that can do so much good for people and be such a time saver. And so disclosure there is no harm done to require disclosure, but it does create a means to punish those who use chatbots for nefarious purposes.
Other things that came out, or do we have this appropriately focused? Anything else you want to raise? We have 3 minutes left, so don't be shy.
Mary, at risk of beating Andrew out for somebody who's from a big family and talks too much, I just wanted to say I think Dan's point's a great one, and I think that one of the things that I've seen is unnecessary disclosures. Right? Courts have said you got to disclose. Any attorney that uses AI has to disclose when a brief is filed with the use of AI. And it turns out every attorney uses AI by that definition because Westlaw and Lexis and every legal search engine is AI assisted. And so I think casting not too broad a net with those disclosures and making sure you don't get all of the false positives that you would get with maybe any AI. I think you have to narrow in on what type of AI has to be disclosed because it's everywhere and everyone's going to disclose everything because it's in Outlook, it's in Gmail. It's
great. You're getting a lot of love coming through. It's great. Julia?
Hi, Mary. This is may be really nuanced, but something that I've been thinking about too is, as our population, at least here in Maine, becomes more diverse and we have more languages across all our counties. Last week, I came into this sort of scenario of, I think it was a woman working in an assessor's office, and that she could not perform her job because everyone she was calling, people thought she was AI because English was not her first language. So it was AI generated. So I'm not really sure how to bring that into the conversation, but it is something that I had not thought about until last week when I had to respond to that scenario. So just food for thought.
Yeah, there's a similar, as things get more realistic, they get inherently more scary. And the same was true in the filmmaking industry with, CGI. The more realistic they made computer generated characters, the more it antagonized audiences. So they had to de-perfect them in order to get them to be engaging in the right way, which is really interesting. And I think the same is going to be true for a lot of the AI generated translators and voice simulators and things like that. That there has to be that registration of what it really is for you to trust it. It's interesting. Okay, well, that brings us to 3:55. So I will hand it back over to Scott, who will brief us about the next steps in our discussion and what we'll do together in the upcoming weeks.
Thank you, Mary. So I think I have two jobs here. One is to, as Mary said, give you a little bit of preview of what's ahead, and the second is to do that by 4 p.m. here. I'll start by looking just at the schedule. So as you all have experienced, as we've talked about, much of the work of this task force this spring has been exploratory in nature. You have heard from local practitioners, you've heard from national experts about how AI is showing up today, what future impacts might be, and being able to explore a bunch of different variations of this. You all are also part of subgroups that have begun answering specific questions about AI's impacts in different areas of Maine's economy or society, and beginning to use those answers to shape potential recommendations for the task force. And I want to congratulate you all for your work getting through that. This meeting is the last of these exploratory meetings. You've been tremendous audiences, had great questions, really welcome speakers from across the country and around your neighborhoods here. So this will largely wrap up the work of the task force as a whole for July. Your subgroups, many of them still have some work to do in producing responses by the end of the month. You all get to go have fun in August. We may send you a few things to read. And as we turn the corner into September and October, as we've talked about, we have 4 meetings, and the focus will be to discuss turning those preliminary recommendations coming out of the subgroups and sync into a report and synthesizing that ultimately you all are responsible for submitting to the governor and the legislature by the end of October. 2 updates to the schedule that I will want to note here, and we will send an email out to all of you immediately afterwards. First, our second meeting in September, we are intending to reschedule to Friday, September 26th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This is going to allow for you all to have a longer in-person discussion than what we've been able to do. We are anticipating this meeting being at a location either in the Augusta area or sort of Brunswick, Freeport area, and we'll have more on that soon. I'll just sort of flag again that this is the intent here is to have a longer meeting as well in person to really jump into this stuff. This meeting will replace the September 24th meeting that also turns out conflicted with Rosh Hashanah. Don't tell my mother that we originally scheduled a meeting for Rosh Hashanah conflict. And then the second one, we are intending to make the October 8th meeting an in-person meeting, no changes at the time, and for that meeting likely to be in the Greater Portland email. We will get updated calendar invites and emails to you all shortly. There is also input that we're going to be synthesizing and sharing with you, both public comments that were received and also input that state agencies have been asked to generate about use cases in their work. And more from that over email. So that is it for me. Again, congratulations to you all. Thank you to you all for the amount of time that you have put into this. Lots of work behind you, lots more hard work ahead.
Yes.
Thank you, Scott.
Mary and I thank you as well. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.